Okay, for our topic, we chose relational control, and we chose to research how conflict in relationships lead to domestic abuse, such as the Rihanna and Chris Brown case. So most people have experienced a relationship that ended up being not so positive, and some of the relationships even became toxic. However, abusive relationships are a completely different issue. Many factors can create a abusive relationship, but an important factor is relational control. The relational control our partner has over us makes an impact on the verbal abuse as well as the severity of physical abuse. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence, which includes beating, burning, strangling by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence, where the intimate partner contacts sexual violence and or the intimate partner stalks their significant other, which results in injuries, fearfulness, and post-traumatic stress disorder. In February of 2009, Chris Brown was accused of physically abusing his then girlfriend, Rihanna. Relational control had a role to play in this abusive relationship. Conflict in relationships can take many different forms, including but not limited to verbal abuse, physical abuse, narcissism, financial control, dependency, and manipulation. Relational control harms the victim in many different types of ways. The impact of both Chris Brown and Rihanna from this relationship will be dissected in this presentation.
In our presentation, we develop various researches. Some researches include Hammy, which he explains why some people might stay in a relationship. Dominic and Mullen, they examine the different types of attachment styles and couple styles that people face in their adult lives. Good Boy, Butterfield, Singler, and Banfield, they take a look at there are 237 married adults, and they examine them by doing a study in their effects when hurtful messages are along to each other and their repairment strategies. Fourth, Sussex and Ingwood also examine the psychopathy in the romantic relationships and the severity it can cause. And then Huang and Shin survey about 721 employees in 15 departments to review the effectiveness of just tackling a conflict and how people respond to that. McDermott explains what red flags are in a relationship and what to look out for. Nelson takes a deep into what narcissism may look like in a relationship and what may not be narcissism. A lot of people confuse the two and assume narcissism is one thing and when it's really another thing. And Tarek Swergen explains what is the cohesive control in a relationship and what are the patterns to look for. And then Hernandez, Enriquez, and Exposito study the controlling behaviors in other peer couples. Martyr encourages ways to power and overcome toxic relationships by identifying and examining the relationship, having the individual take control and confront their toxic relationship, and also giving like empowering techniques and way to cope the situation they were previously in. Buddy T provides sources and techniques to help assist victim domestic abuse. And then the National Domestic Violence Hotline website provides assistance for domestic violence victims. It's just a website that literally anybody in the public can go to take a look and to see what their sources are and what to do when they're in that situation. Bert Thomas provides knowledge of abuse that will happen between Chris and Rihanna and the perspective of Chris Brown. A couple of years ago, Chris Brown released a documentary. He kind of just gave his side of the story of what happened between him and Rihanna and how the situation went down. Hengel deep dives into the history between the relationship between Chris Brown and Rihanna. Many people may know that they've been dating for a few years and they were under this impression that they were like the perfect couple. And then out of nowhere, when the incident happened, everybody was very shocked that this domestic abuse incident happened. There's also a search warrant evidence from the state of California regarding the case between Chris Brown and Rihanna. And then Alley, Bybee, and Sullivan examine advocacy for domestic violence survivors. There's not too many, they say like there's not too many sources for domestic violence, so they're trying to advocate for more sources for these survivors.
All right, thank you so much for that, Abby and Alejandra, for that introduction. So the goal for me today is to explain the conflict and what went down between Rihanna and Chris Brown and kind of how the situation came to play. So I do want to start off before I explain the situation with a trigger warning about physical violence, because a lot of the things I am going to be talking about are graphic and not for some people's ears, not even for mine, honestly. It's really graphic. So I'm only going to go into slight details, but I did want to give a trigger warning because there is a lot of talk about physical violence. So I want to start by saying many people are aware of the conflict between Chris Brown and Rihanna, but not as many people understand the severity of the situation and also why it happened. So actually 14 years ago, on the night before the Grammys in 2009, Chris Brown assaulted his then girlfriend Rihanna in a Lamborghini, and it resulted in a busted lip, a black eye, and facial bruising. So the argument initially started over Robin Fenty, which is Rihanna's full name, confronting Brown about cheating allegations, which he admitted to. He admitted to the confrontation about being unfaithful, and she began getting upset, yelling at him, and hitting him. He reacted by punching her in the face with a closed fist. She started spitting blood on him, and they began fighting in the middle of the street. So this is when it gets a little bit more graphic and jarring. If you'd like to read more into the details of this, we have a police report in our sources on the outline. So, but I'm just going to kind of go over it. Brown had punched Rihanna repeatedly in the face and even threw her phone out the car window. And when she attempted to call for help, he made threats, telling her that he's gonna beat the shit out of her when they got home, and told her that she just did the stupidest thing ever, and said, "Now I'm really going to kill you." So this argument escalated into physical violence, led Rihanna to be left with visible face injuries and be hospitalized. Brown was charged with felony assault and for making criminal threats on March 5th of 2009. He pleaded guilty to a felony on June 22nd of that year and accepted a plea deal of community labor, 5 years of probation, and domestic violence counseling. And then as of now, 2023, we can see that this was only the beginning of his violent history. He has since been accused of violating his restraining order from Rihanna in 2012. He has faced countless assault charges and accusations, received a restraining order from his ex-girlfriend with the last name Tran, and has even faced sexual assault accusations. So this narrative shows that even relational control and abuse doesn't discriminate to those who seem untouchable, like Rihanna. She's obviously successful and admired, and Chris Brown is as well, but that doesn't protect them from becoming abusive or being a victim to physical violence. So yeah.
Okay. An analysis of the conflict is this kept going. It escalated really quickly and both got physical. Using the model of effective conflict management, struggle is that they both failed to work through the differentiation state. And this is where they both address the issue. Instead, they both try to argue, saying that they were right, they were wrong, and they didn't really go into detail about talking about the situation. And it led to escalatory conflict. And this is where it's a very thin line where if you don't do this conversation right, it does lead to spiraling. It can lead to violence, screaming, and just gets out of control. And because both parties did fail to try and understand each other and where they were coming from, they did get defensive. And then something that was interesting is that in the Chris Brown documentary of the situation, he never mentioned that he was going to kill her. He just stated that she said that he was going to kill her. And he was trying to argue his side and say that he was trying to calm her down, trying to make her realize that she was worsening the situation. And he said that she threw his keys out of the car and that she started screaming and that he was stressed out and he was trying to calm her down and didn't know what was going on. So both of them kind of failed to understand what was going on. They were both acting out of fear. And then when she did start screaming, help, he's trying to kill me, and then kept spitting in his face, she was acting out of emotions. She could have been feeling betrayal, fear, anxiety, a whole bunch of other things that do mention that when you're under so much stress like that, then you don't act like yourself. Another thing is that following the reference from Sanchez, it does go into that young type of love kid, and he did touch base on that, saying that they were both too young to understand what was really going on. There were like outside forces that were influencing the relationship, so they were both trying to control each other, both trying to go through each other's phone, trying to figure out where they were at, and instead of trying to get the situation under control and figure out what happened, they both let their pressures get the best of them, and it did lead into them screaming at each other a lot.
Thank you, Daisy. I am going to go over the recommendations for the conflict, and just a forewarning, I am a little bit sick, so if I cough, I apologize. It has been 14 years since the violent incident, but fans still do hate him for what he did. And I recommend that Chris Brown should consider taking anger management support, such as classes, continuing his counseling, mental health support, and he needs to continue taking accountability for his actions. He actually wrote on his Instagram story, "If y'all still hate me for a mistake I made as a 17-year-old, please kiss my whole entire ass." But he was 19 at the time of the incident. And it just says to me he wants it to be swept under the rug, which should not happen. It should be continued to surface every once in a while, because there are so many cases in the media and in cases, for people who are not in the media, and it gets swept under the rug, and he should continue to take accountability. The AMA Awards canceled Chris Brown's performance. It was actually going to be like a tribute to Michael Jackson, and it was going to be for the song Beat It. And instead, they decided to cancel it. It's still widely talked about and remembered in history, and it should be continued to be brought up and not forgotten to ensure the consequences of his domestic violence are continuing, and for everyone else as well. And according to the National Domestic Violence Hotline website, it's important to learn about the warning signs to help yourself and others who may be victims of domestic violence. Warning signs include showing extreme jealousy, insults, preventing someone from making their own choices in life, and establishing power and control in many ways. He was forced to do 5 years of domestic violence counseling, as we had stated previously, which should happen for all abusers, and they should continue also to be on watch for the future. Fans should not enable Chris Brown or anyone else who is an abuser. Domestic violence advocacy is crucial, and in many cases, victims who are not rich and famous stay because they lack resources, including childcare, a home to go to, money, counseling, according to Allen in 2004. And lastly, for victims of domestic violence, it's important to set boundaries, since it is one thing that you can control.
Okay, thank you everyone for sharing. So concluding our presentation, conflicts in relationships can have lasting effects on one's mental and physical health. In some relationships, a conflict can grow so large it turns abusive and even physically violent. So 14 years ago, Rihanna confronted her then boyfriend, Chris Brown, regarding cheating allegations. The conflict between the two grew into a vocal argument and then turned violent when Chris repeatedly hit Rihanna and threatened to kill her. This was an example of escalatory conflict. Both parties allowed their emotions to control their actions, and instead of listening to each other and understanding the situation, they both became defensive, and the conflict turned out of control and became violent. Rihanna and Chris Brown's abusive relationship made headlines, and the story was one that many women, even men, could relate to. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States, and during 1 year, that equates to more than 10 million men and women. Thank you for listening to our presentation.